June 1944. A British officers' club in southern England, just weeks after D-Day. The room was thick with cigarette smoke, expensive scotch, and the kind of smug superiority that only comes from centuries of imperial tradition. A group of high-ranking British officers, colonels and brigadiers mostly, were having what they thought was a private conversation in a corner booth. Their voices just loud enough to carry across the room where a handful of American liaison officers were trying to enjoy their drinks and mind their own business. That's when one of the Brits, a colonel with a handlebar mustache that looked like it had its own military rank, said something that would change the entire dynamic of Anglo-American military relations. The problem with the Americans, he announced loudly enough that everyone could hear, is that they're Britain's inexperienced little brother trying to play soldier. They've been in this war for what, 2 years? We've been fighting since 1939. They show up late to both world wars, throw money and bodies at the problem, and then act like they won it single-handedly. His companions laughed, encouraged by the alcohol and their own sense of superiority. Another officer chimed in. They're children playing at warfare, with expensive toys. They've got all the equipment in the world, but none of the experience, none of the military tradition. It's like watching a wealthy provincial try to join a gentleman's club. They have the membership fee, but they'll never really belong. The American officers at the nearby table went rigid, their drinks frozen halfway to their mouths, their faces turning red with barely suppressed rage. One of them, a major from Texas, started to stand up, ready to introduce these limey bastards to some good old-fashioned American diplomacy delivered via fists. But his companion, a captain from Boston, grabbed his arm and whispered something that made the major sit back down and smile instead. "Don't start something here," the captain said quietly. "But make damn sure General Patton hears every word of what these assholes just said. Now, before we go any further into this story, before you hear about what happened when Patton found out that British officers were calling American soldiers inexperienced children playing dress-up, we need you to do something. Drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from. What state? What city? Whether you're watching from a base overseas or from your living room in America. Because this story isn't just about Patton defending American honor. This is about that moment when the world realized that America wasn't Britain's little brother anymore, wasn't playing second fiddle to anyone, and damn sure wasn't going to tolerate condescension from allies who needed us more than we needed them. If you want to hear more stories like this, real accounts of American soldiers and generals proving themselves against everyone who doubted them, then you better smash that subscribe button right now. Hit that like button if you're already feeling fired up about what you just heard. And here's what we want from you after this story is over. Comment below with your honest opinion about whether Patton's response was justified or if he took it too far. Because what he did next wasn't just a clapback. It was a systematic, brutal demonstration of why America had already surpassed Britain as a military power, and why the inexperienced little brother was actually running the show. Share this video with any veteran, any Brit who needs a history lesson, any American who's ever been underestimated and came back to prove the doubters dead wrong. Now let's get to what happened when word of this British officers' club conversation made its way up the chain of command to General George S. Patton, Jr., a man who had exactly zero patience for European snobbery and about 1,000,000 different ways to prove American superiority. The report reached Patton within 24 hours, delivered by that captain from Boston, who had wisely stopped his friend from starting a barroom brawl. The captain stood at attention in Patton's office and recounted every word the British officers had said. The inexperienced little brother comment, the children playing soldier crack, the dismissive attitude toward American military capability. Patton listened in complete silence, his face absolutely unreadable, his fingers drumming on his desk in a rhythm that his staff had learned to recognize as a warning sign of an approaching storm. When the captain finished his report, Patton sat there for a long moment, and then he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even an angry smile. It was the smile of a poker player who just realized he's holding a royal flush and his opponents don't know it yet. "Captain," Patton said quietly, "you did the right thing bringing this to me instead of starting an international incident in a bar. Now I'm going to start an international incident in a much more productive way." He turned to his chief of staff. "Get me a meeting with General Montgomery and whoever else is available from British High Command. Tell them I want to discuss coordination of American and British forces for upcoming operations. Make it sound routine, boring even. I want them to be relaxed and comfortable." His staff exchanged glances, knowing that relaxed and comfortable British officers were about to have a very bad day. Patton continued, "And I want detailed reports on every military operation since D-Day. American versus British performance metrics. Casualty ratios, ground taken, objectives achieved, everything. I want numbers, and I want them ironclad." Over the next 48 hours, Patton's staff compiled what would become one of the most devastating presentations in military history. They gathered data on every engagement, every advance, every objective since the Normandy invasion. And what that data showed was going to make a lot of British officers very uncomfortable, because it proved beyond any doubt that the inexperienced little brother was outperforming the British military in virtually every measurable category. The meeting took place in a commandeered French tow, with Montgomery and several senior British commanders present, along with Patton and his staff. The Brits showed up expecting a routine coordination meeting, maybe some discussion of supply lines or strategic objectives. What they got instead was Patton at his absolute savage best, armed with facts, figures, and a burning desire to put uppity Europeans in their place. Patton started off friendly enough, thanking the British commanders for their cooperation and experience. "Gentlemen," he began, "I wanted to have this meeting because there seems to be some confusion about the relative capabilities and experience of American versus British forces. I thought it would be useful to review the actual operational data so we can coordinate more effectively going forward." Montgomery, ever the pompous ass, nodded condescendingly. "Of course, General Patton, we're always happy to share our experience with our American colleagues. After all, we've been at this considerably longer than you chaps." And that's when Patton struck, dropping the pretense and going straight for the jugular. "That's interesting that you mention experience, Field Marshal Montgomery, because I've been looking at the numbers from our operations since D-Day, and I'm seeing some patterns that might surprise you." He gestured to his staff, who unveiled large charts showing comparative data between American and British forces. Since the Normandy landings, American forces have advanced an average of 12 miles per week. British forces have advanced an average of 6 miles per week. We're moving twice as fast. Montgomery's face started to color, but Patton wasn't done. Not even close. American forces have captured 40% more territory with 20% fewer casualties. We've secured objectives an average of 3 days ahead of schedule, while British operations have run an average of 4 days behind schedule. Now, I'm just a simple American who apparently doesn't understand the sophisticated European military tradition, but those numbers suggest that maybe, just maybe, we inexperienced children are doing something right. The British officers were stunned into silence, their comfortable assumptions about American military inferiority evaporating faster than morning fog under artillery fire. But Patton was just getting warmed up, and what he said next would become legendary in American military circles, and would be whispered about in British officers' clubs with a mixture of grudging respect and burning embarrassment. "But let's talk about experience," Patton continued, his voice taking on an edge that could cut through steel. "You're right that Britain has been in this war longer than America. You've been fighting since 1939, and in those 5 years, you've been driven out of Norway, driven out of France, driven out of Greece, and nearly driven out of North Africa. You lost Singapore, Hong Kong, and Burma. You've spent most of this war retreating, holding defensive lines, and waiting for someone to come save you. The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Montgomery looked like he'd been slapped across the face with a white glove, and the other British officers were turning various shades of red and purple. But Patton wasn't finished destroying their egos yet. He was just getting started. America entered this war in December 1941. In 2.5 years, we've completely destroyed Japanese naval power in the Pacific. We've liberated North Africa. We've conquered Sicily. We've invaded Italy. And we've established the largest beachhead in military history on the French coast. We've done more in 30 months than you accomplished in the previous 60. So tell me, Field Marshal, who exactly is the inexperienced little brother here? Montgomery tried to sputter a response. Something about Britain standing alone against Hitler, about the Battle of Britain, about Commonwealth sacrifices, but Patton cut him off with a wave of his hand. Yes, Britain stood alone. And Britain got its ass kicked alone until America showed up with the money, equipment, and military power to actually win this war. Lend-Lease didn't just supply your military, it saved your country from economic collapse and starvation. American industrial capacity is producing more war material in a month than British factories produce in a year. And American generals who you dismiss as inexperienced are running circles around British commanders who are still fighting World War I with slightly better tanks. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow more menacing than if he'd been shouting. You want to talk about military tradition? Fine. Britain's military tradition is empire building against technologically inferior opponents, followed by losing to any peer competitor who actually fights back. America's military tradition is innovation, adaptation, and winning. We don't have centuries of aristocratic officer corps tradition holding us back. We promote based on competence, not birth. We innovate because we're not constrained by doing things the proper way. And we win because we focus on results instead of style points. Montgomery finally found his voice, trying to salvage some dignity from this absolutely brutal verbal assault. General Patton, I think you're being rather ungracious about Britain's contributions to this war. We held the line when no one else. You held the line because you had no other choice. Patton interrupted, his voice sharp as a cavalry saber. Don't mistake necessity for virtue. And let's be crystal clear about something. Without American industrial power, American logistics, and American manpower, Britain would either be speaking German right now, or would still be huddled on your island hoping Hitler gets bored and goes away. He walked over to another chart his staff had prepared. Let's talk about the quality of troops, since you Brits seem to think your military tradition produces superior soldiers. Since D-Day, American infantry units have had a 73% success rate in achieving initial objectives in combat operations. British infantry has achieved a 54% success rate. American armor has destroyed German tanks at a ratio of 1.8 to 1. British armor is barely managing 1.1 to 1. American forces have adapted to hedgerow fighting, urban combat, and combined arms operations faster than any military in history. Meanwhile, British forces are still using tactics that would have been outdated in 1918. One of the British brigadiers, his face red with anger and embarrassment, spoke up. Those statistics don't account for the quality of opposition. British forces have consistently faced stronger German positions. Bullshit, Patton said flatly. And the crude Americanism in this formal British military setting hit like a grenade. That's complete and total bullshit, Brigadier. And you know it. We've analyzed the German unit dispositions. You're not facing tougher opposition, you're just slower to overcome it. When American forces hit a strong German position, we flank it, we blast it with artillery, we coordinate airstrikes, and we push through. British forces hit the same kind of position and you stop. You consolidate. You have tea and crumpets while you plan the proper gentlemanly approach. And by the time you're ready to attack, the Germans have reinforced or withdrawn to better positions. Now, folks, If you're watching this and you're getting fired up, hearing Patton absolutely demolish British military arrogance with cold, hard facts, then we need you to show this video some love right now. Hit that like button if you're enjoying this savage takedown of European snobbery, and drop a comment telling us about a time when someone underestimated you or America and you got to prove them wrong. We want to hear your stories, because that's what this whole channel is about. Americans proved doubters wrong, over and over again from 1776 to today. Don't forget to subscribe, because we've got a whole library of these stories ready to go. And trust me, they just keep getting better. Now let's get back to that conference room where Patton is systematically destroying every British military myth, while Montgomery and his staff sit there wishing they'd kept their mouths shut about inexperienced Americans. Patton moved to yet another presentation board, this one showing comparative logistics data. Let's talk about military efficiency. Since you gentlemen seem to think American wealth and industrial capacity is somehow a disadvantage or doesn't count, American supply lines are moving 40,000 tons of material per day to frontline units. British supply lines are moving 18,000 tons per day. We're feeding, arming, and fueling twice as many combat operations with supply chains that work better, move faster, and waste less. That's not because we're throwing money at the problem. It's because we've completely reinvented military logistics, while you're still using supply methods that Wellington would recognize. He pointed to specific data points. American forces require an average of 2.3 days to refit and resupply after a major engagement. British forces average 4.7 days for the same process. American maintenance units return damaged vehicles to service 60% faster than British units. American medical evacuation gets wounded soldiers to field hospitals in half the time. This isn't inexperienced, gentlemen. This is superior organization, better training, and frankly, less bullshit getting in the way of getting the job done. Montgomery tried one more time to mount a defense. General Patton, statistics can be manipulated to show anything. The real measure of military quality is battlefield performance under pressure, and I would submit that British forces have demonstrated considerable resilience. Resilience? Patton's laugh was harsh and without humor. You're calling it resilience? Let me tell you what resilience actually looks like. Operation Cobra. American forces broke through German lines, advanced 30 miles in 72 hours, destroyed 2 German armies, and liberated half of France in a month. That's not resilience. That's aggressive, decisive warfare. Operation Goodwood. British forces threw 3 armored divisions at German positions, gained 8 miles in 3 days at enormous cost, and then stopped. You call that resilience. I call it inadequate. He walked back to stand directly in front of Montgomery, and the personal nature of what he said next made every British officer in the room acutely uncomfortable. Field Marshal, you've built your entire reputation on exactly one significant victory, El Alamein. And you know what El Alamein really demonstrates? When you have overwhelming numerical superiority, complete air dominance, perfect intelligence about enemy, positions and supply situation, and months to prepare, British forces can defeat a German army that's already starving and out of fuel. Congratulations. That's not military genius. That's basic competence with every possible advantage. The atmosphere in the room was now openly hostile. Several British officers looked ready to either walk out or start throwing punches, but they were trapped by military protocol and the sinking realization that Patton had them dead to rights. Every statistic was accurate. Every comparison was valid. And the conclusion was inescapable. American forces were outperforming British forces across virtually every metric that mattered. Patton softened his tone slightly, but the message remained devastating. Look, gentlemen, I didn't call this meeting to humiliate you. I called it because I heard that some British officers, maybe some of you in this room, maybe not, have been calling American soldiers inexperienced children and referring to us as Britain's little brother playing at war. And I needed to make something absolutely clear. Those days are over. America isn't Britain's little brother. We're not your former colony still seeking approval. We're not inexperienced children who need guidance from sophisticated Europeans. We are the most powerful military force on this planet, and we're proving it every single day on battlefields from Normandy to the Pacific. He let that sink in before continuing. The British Empire is dying. You know it. I know it. Everyone paying attention knows it. After this war, Britain will be a secondary power managing decline. America will be the dominant superpower shaping the new world order. That's not arrogance. That's demographic reality, economic fact, and military truth. You can resent it. You can mock us behind our backs in your officers' clubs, or you can accept it and work with us as genuine partners, instead of pretending you're still the senior partner in this alliance. Montgomery's face had gone from red to pale, the implications of Patton's words hitting him like artillery shells. One of the other British officers tried to mount a defense, General Patton. Britain has sacrificed enormously in this war. We've been bombed. We've lost hundreds of thousands of men. Our economy is devastated. To suggest that we haven't contributed. I'm not suggesting you haven't contributed. Patton cut him off. I'm stating facts about current military performance and future trajectories. Britain has fought hard. Britain has sacrificed. And Britain deserves respect for standing alone in 1940. But it's 1944 now, and the war has moved on. The center of Allied power isn't London anymore. It's Washington. The decisive military force isn't the British Army. It's the American military. And the sooner you accept that reality instead of clinging to myths about British military superiority and American inexperience, the better we can work together. He walked back to his seat and sat down, his posture relaxing slightly, but his eyes still sharp. Here's what's going to happen going forward. American and British forces will coordinate as equals, genuine equals, not the patronizing bullshit where you treat us like promising students who might someday match British standards. When American commanders make tactical decisions, British officers will respect those decisions, instead of second-guessing them based on the assumption that we don't know what we're doing. And if I hear one more word about Americans being inexperienced children or Britain's little brother, I will personally ensure that every instance of British military underperformance is documented, publicized, and used to justify giving American commanders operational priority in every theater. Montgomery, defeated but trying to maintain some dignity, nodded slowly. General Patton, your points are noted. Perhaps there has been some unwarranted condescension in some quarters. I will ensure that British officers are reminded of the importance of Allied cooperation, not cooperation. Patton corrected. Partnership, real partnership between equals. Because here's the truth. Field Marshal, America doesn't need Britain to win this war. We're perfectly capable of beating Germany and Japan without you. But winning together is faster and costs fewer lives on both sides. So let's drop the Imperial Superiority Act and work together as partners who respect each other's capabilities. Can you do that? The British officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, and finally, Montgomery responded with as much grace as he could muster given the circumstances. Yes, General Patton, we can do that. Excellent, Patton said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Then let's get back to work. We've got a war to win, and I don't give a damn whether it's won the British way or the American way, as long as it's won the fastest way with the fewest casualties. Dismissed. As the British officers filed out of the conference room, several of them looking like they'd just survived an artillery barrage, one of Patton's own staff officers approached him quietly. Sir, that was intense. Do you think you might have been too harsh? We still need to work with these guys." Patton smiled, and this time it was almost friendly. "Colonel, those British officers needed a wake-up call. They've been dining out on past glories and imperial mythology for so long they forgot that the world has changed. Now they know where they stand. And you know what? They'll be better allies for it, because they'll stop condescending to us and start actually listening when we talk." The colonel nodded but looked uncertain. "Sir, what if they complain to Eisenhower? What if this creates problems with the Supreme Command?" Patton's smile widened. "Let them complain. You think Ike doesn't know these numbers? You think he isn't tired of British officers acting like we're the junior varsity team? The only reason Ike maintains diplomatic language is because that's his job, managing alliance politics. My job is winning battles and making sure my soldiers get the respect they deserve. And if that means occasionally reminding our British cousins that 1776 wasn't just a temporary setback, then so be it." He poured himself a drink and continued. "Here's what's really going to happen. Those British officers are going to go back to their units, and they're going to tell other British officers what just happened in this room. Word is going to spread through British military circles that Patton has receipts, hard data, undeniable statistics, proving that American forces are outperforming British forces across the board. And you know what effect that's going to have? It's going to shut down the condescending bullshit, because now they know that if they call us inexperienced children, we can respond with facts that prove we're actually running this show." Within 48 hours, Patton's prediction proved accurate. The story of what happened in that conference room spread through Allied headquarters like wildfire. Different versions emerged, some exaggerated, some sanitized, but the core truth remained. Patton had confronted British military arrogance head-on and backed up every word with statistical evidence that British commanders couldn't refute. The effect on American morale was electric, especially among junior officers and enlisted men who had been enduring British condescension for months, and the effect on British attitudes was exactly what Patton had intended. A sharp recalibration of how they viewed and treated American forces. But the story didn't end there, because Patton being Patton, he decided to drive the point home even further with a demonstration that would become legendary in military history. 2 weeks after the conference room confrontation, Patton orchestrated what his staff called Operation Humble Pie, a series of competitive exercises between American and British units designed to publicly demonstrate which force was truly superior. He framed it as cooperative training and sold it to Allied command as a way to improve coordination between American and British forces. In reality, it was Patton creating opportunities to embarrass British units and prove American superiority in ways that couldn't be dismissed as statistical manipulation. The first exercise was a timed advance through simulated enemy territory, with both American and British armored units tackling the same course with the same obstacles. Patton made sure observers from both militaries were present, along with a few carefully selected war correspondents. The American unit, a tank battalion from the 4th Armored Division, completed the course in 2 hours and 17 minutes, adapting quickly to unexpected obstacles, coordinating effectively between tanks and supporting infantry, and achieving all objectives with minimal simulated casualties. The British unit, a comparable armored battalion that Montgomery, personally selected as one of his best, took 4 hours and 43 minutes, got bogged down at several points requiring extensive reorganization, and suffered significantly higher simulated losses. The American observers were professionally respectful, but the British officers looked like they wanted to disappear into the ground. The second exercise was even more devastating to British pride. Patton organized a live-fire artillery competition, pitting American artillery batteries against British equivalents in terms of accuracy, speed of deployment, and sustained fire capability. The American artillery units, using newer techniques of coordinated fire control and more aggressive deployment strategies, consistently outperformed their British counterparts by significant margins. They could set up faster, adjust fire more quickly, deliver more accurate strikes, and sustain higher rates of fire. The British artillery, using more traditional methods that emphasized careful preparation and methodical execution, simply couldn't match the speed and intensity of American fire support. One British artillery officer, watching American crews in action, was overheard saying to a colleague, "Good God, they fire artillery like they're playing jazz music. All improvisation and energy. We're still conducting it like a classical symphony, and we're getting absolutely shown up." After a week of these cooperative exercises that consistently demonstrated American superiority in speed, innovation, and combat effectiveness, Patton called another meeting with British command. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. The British officers arrived without their earlier arrogance, and Montgomery himself was considerably more subdued. Patton opened the meeting with a tone that was firm, but not antagonistic. "Gentlemen, I hope the past week has been educational. I didn't organize these exercises to humiliate you. Well, maybe a little bit to humiliate you, but mainly to demonstrate that American military capability is real, quantifiable, and frankly superior to British performance in most areas that matter for winning this war. Can we now agree that the inexperienced little brother narrative is complete horseshit?" Montgomery, to his credit, nodded with something approaching genuine humility. "General Patton, your point is made. American forces have demonstrated exceptional capability, and any British officers who continue to underestimate American military prowess are living in denial. I will personally ensure that such attitudes are corrected within British ranks." Patton nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Field Marshal. And let me be clear, this wasn't about proving Britain is bad at warfare. It's about establishing mutual respect as a foundation for genuine cooperation. British forces have strengths. Your infantry is tough as nails. Your special operations are world-class. And your institutional knowledge of certain types of operations is valuable. But you're not superior to us. And we're not your inexperienced protégés. We're different militaries with different strengths. And we're both stronger when we work together as equals." He gestured to his staff to distribute documents. "So here's what I'm proposing. A genuine exchange program, where American and British units actually share techniques, instead of just assuming British methods are automatically better. Your commandos can teach our Rangers some tricks. Our armor and artillery can share the innovations that make us faster and more aggressive. Your intelligence services can coordinate better with ours. We stop the pissing contests and start actually learning from each other. Deal?" The British officers reviewed the proposal, and gradually nods of agreement went around the room. What Patton had done was brilliant in its simplicity. He'd crushed British arrogance so thoroughly that they had no choice but to accept partnership on equal terms. And then he'd immediately offered a constructive path forward that allowed them to save face while still acknowledging American superiority. It was a diplomatic genius wrapped in a very undiplomatic delivery. Over the following months, relationships between American and British forces noticeably improved. The condescending attitudes that had poisoned earlier interactions largely disappeared, replaced by genuine professional respect. British officers stopped making inexperienced Americans jokes, partly because it was no longer funny, and partly because they'd learned that American officers had very long memories and very detailed statistics ready to deploy in response. And American soldiers, knowing that Patton had stood up for them and put arrogant British officers in their place, fought with even greater intensity and pride. The story of Patton's confrontation became a morale booster that spread through American ranks, a reminder that their leadership had their backs and wouldn't tolerate disrespect from anyone, ally or enemy. Years later, after the war, one of the British officers who had been present at that initial confrontation wrote in his memoirs about the experience. "General Patton taught us a humbling but necessary lesson," he wrote. "We British had grown so accustomed to being the dominant military power, so comfortable with our imperial traditions, and our sense of cultural superiority that we failed to recognize when the torch had been passed. America had surpassed us, not just in industrial capacity or manpower, but in military innovation, operational tempo, and combat effectiveness. Patton's brutal honesty, backed by irrefutable evidence, forced us to confront a reality we had been avoiding. The 20th century belonged to America, not Britain. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it made us better allies and probably better soldiers. Eisenhower, when he finally heard the full details of what Patton had done, called him into his office with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. "George, I've had 3 separate complaints from British command about your confrontational approach to alliance management. Montgomery says you were unnecessarily harsh. What do you have to say for yourself?" Patton didn't hesitate. "I say that British officers were calling American soldiers inexperienced children and treating us like we're guests in their war, instead of the main force actually winning it. I provided statistical evidence that American forces outperform British forces in virtually every meaningful metric. I organized competitive exercises that proved the same point, and I secured an agreement for genuine cooperation as equals instead of the patronizing bullshit we were getting before. If that's confrontational, then I'm guilty as charged, and I'd do it again tomorrow." Eisenhower sighed, but there was a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You know I can't officially approve of what you did. I have to maintain diplomatic relations with our British allies, and publicly humiliating their officers doesn't make that easier." "I know," Patton acknowledged. "That's why you have me do the dirty work while you stay above the fray. You're the good cop who maintains alliance harmony. I'm the bad cop who makes sure nobody mistakes American politeness for American weakness. We're a team, Ike. You keep the alliance together. I make sure we're respected within it." Eisenhower leaned back in his chair, studying Patton for a long moment. "Off the record, George, you were right to do it. Those British officers needed to understand that the world has changed and America is leading now, not following. But next time, maybe give me a heads up before you systematically demolish British military pride with PowerPoint presentations and live-fire exercises." Patton grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" Now, folks, if this story didn't fire you up with American pride, if you didn't feel a surge of satisfaction hearing about Patton defending American soldiers and proving that we're not anybody's little brother, then I don't know what will. This is what American excellence looks like. Not bragging without substance, but backing up every claim with hard evidence and undeniable performance. We don't win through tradition or aristocratic officer corps or centuries of imperial experience. We win through innovation, aggression, and being willing to completely reinvent how things are done if the old ways aren't working. If you loved this story, then show us some love right back. Subscribe to this channel right now because we've got dozens more stories just like this one. Real history about American soldiers, American generals, and American ingenuity proving doubters wrong and changing the world. Hit that like button if Patton's takedown of British arrogance made your day. And drop a comment answering this question. Who do you think handled this situation better? Patton with his aggressive confrontation approach, or Eisenhower with his diplomatic management style? Both were necessary, but which approach do you respect more? We want to hear your thoughts. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand that American military dominance isn't accidental or just about having more money. It's about being better at warfare than everyone else and having the receipts to prove it. Thanks for watching. And remember, America doesn't have a military tradition going back centuries like European powers. We have something better. We have a tradition of winning anyway, of innovating faster than anyone else can adapt, and of never ever accepting being treated as second best. That's the American way, and that's why we're still the most powerful military force on the planet, 80 years after Patton proved it to those British officers who learned the hard way not to call us inexperienced children. See you in the next story, where we'll bring you another moment of American excellence that history books sometimes forget to mention.